Okay, there we go.
Okay, yeah, good morning, Professor Tootle.
Morning.
So today's conversation, you are a professor of love, right?
Yes. Yep,
Kind
absolutely.
of like Arthur Brooks, he got he got appointed to Harvard as a professor of love, and that's kind of what he is, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, in a way, I guess. Let me stretch, and I'll do that professor thing where I make an incorrect answer a correct answer.
Cool.
If you find the human experience as, maybe the most important thing to study is human thriving, then in a way, I guess I could say history professor is a professor of love.
Okay, well, that cracks me up so much because you really don't know what the topic is today, but thanks for going with it and saying, sure, I'm an expert on love. I don't think you are, but we're going to see here in just a minute.
Okay.
So here's the reason I wanted to do this conversation today. But before, well, I guess I want to ask you a question or two before we start the reason. I don't want to unveil it all at one time. The Queen died, and now there's a new king in England, or the British Empire, whatever's left of it. What's your reflection on that? As a history professor, right? This isn't a conversation on personal love. This is a conversation on like global love or shared values or what life means or how societies interact. What's your reaction on the Queen dying?
Well, I think of it as, I would want to show some restraint because I understand that other people in another country feel deeply about their national institutions. And so I don't want to say anything that would be construed as improper or insensitive. I don't want to hurt their feelings, but
that's nice of you. Thank you. But you're a history professor.
But I would also say, like, I'm also an American, and I don't support any institution that would claim that one type of human being is higher or lower than any other type of human being. But I do think there's some propriety to making bold statements like that the day after somebody's monarch dies.
Sure. And really, it's only the context of why I thought this might be an interesting conversation. What is national identity, and what are people willing to fight and die for, and what do they tell their kids and grandkids? Do people love their country, and is it changing? I mean, that's kind of the broad perspective. So you're fairly academic on this. You're a human being, and yes, she's loved by family and probably millions, and maybe hundreds of millions around the world. She's also hated by some, correct? Or maybe not her personally, but the institution.
Oh, sure. And I think we saw that in some of the Twitter responses. If you're ever looking for hate, you can always turn to Twitter and find a lot of hatred.
A bunch of weird stuff on Twitter. So this is my, would this surprise you that my mom, I don't think she's sad, but she is an Anglophile. And I don't know where a gal from Indiana, who then moved out to Colorado when she married my dad. Yes, I guess we're predominantly English, but she is really English patriot towards the monarchy, not towards Parliament, not towards whatever. She loves the monarchy, and where that comes from. And by the way, she's not alone. I've had on Facebook, which isn't as ugly as Twitter, at least in my feed. I've seen literally hundreds of my friends express empathy and sympathy and love and outpouring of goodwill towards the Queen. And it kind of confuses me a little bit. And then, by the way, among a subset of my liberal friends, some hatred towards the Queen and what she stands for, colonialism, et cetera, et cetera. Can you help explain a little bit of that love, where it's coming from? Why does everyone love a monarchy?
Well, I think what people are, people are attracted to this stability of her image. She's been around for so long and been a mainstay, and also it's easy to admire many of her character traits, especially when it comes to her restraint and her sense of duty in terms of being the symbol of the British monarchy. And if I were a defender of the British monarchy, I would say that it's a historical institution that exists mostly as a symbol of what it means to be a part of the British Empire, and what it means to be English. Probably the meaning will also vary depending on which part of the British Empire you are in, and your own particular status within it. But because it is a thing that so many people are connected to, people have different feelings. As far as Americans go, I've always thought that this it's natural that we have a kind of affinity to the English-speaking world, and simply because we share so many cultural ties. We kind of think of them as being cousins, you know, and in some cases distant cousins, but cousins nonetheless, because so much of our culture is shared, and always has been, and for the beginning of American history is British history. I don't, you know, I teach American history, but the first 150 years of American history is British history. So it's
Now, what do you mean by that? Let's go down that path for just a second. That doesn't resonate with me. The history of America. Oh, before we became a country.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The first, I mean, you got 60 some odd English colonies in the New World, and 13 of them eventually become the United States. But for the first, from 1607 to 1776, we are part of the British Empire, and so they would have. It's important to understand that they would have conceived of themselves as being a part of the British Empire.
So now let me jump around a little bit. Love is a universal trait. Every human has it. And I'm not talking about personal love of your a spouse or loved one or a dog or maybe some trip you've been on. I'm talking about like civic love. And the English language isn't quite as articulate as some other ancient languages, and maybe some other languages around the world. But that civic love is a universal trait, or is it a new concept?
You know, it's wow, we could really go deep on this, but there's one of the things that is universal about the human experience is an attachment to patterns, and a pattern of the abstract, or what you might call truth, and these things, this attraction to truth, to beauty, also leads to us to have an attachment to other human beings, and the universal, and that's what we usually call love, being attached to the universal concept of truth and beauty, and to your fellow man. Yes, there is probably the answer to your question. It's pretty universal.
Okay, so it never occurred to me, as I said, I'm jumping around a little bit, and then I'll hope to weave a theme here. It never occurred to me that I may not be welcome back to China until that basketball star Brittany. And not that I want to bring marijuana and Russia, or speak ill of Chinese citizens. I may be willing to speak ill of their government, but it never really occurred to me that now, because of social media posts, I may not be welcome in China or Russia. But who cares about me? I assume the citizens of Russia and China love their respective countries, or do they?
I know that many of them have a complicated relationship with their governments. It's hard to say, because part of, we talk about it when we talk about free markets, but maybe we should talk about it when it comes to love. In order to know, you first have to be free from violence or the threat of violence. So you don't find out if you love your country unless you are free from violence when speaking about it. So the people I know who are and I wouldn't claim to know every single Chinese, but I know Chinese people who are in the United States, and I know people who are Russian who are in the United States, and I can tell you that if what they would say when they're here was different, and they are scared for not for themselves if they're here, but they do fear reprisals against their families. So of course, you can't get an accurate understanding of your love relationship while you're under the threat of violence.
So let me ask a follow-up question on that, then I'll bounce around again. You don't think it's possible, Professor, to have one of the primary components of love being a security relationship? As long as you have a protector, you love that protector, and whether that's a city state or a group of people, and maybe it's a perverted love, I guess would be your point.
No, I want to be careful. A security relationship means that somebody is using violence on your behalf, not not against you. That's a pretty important distinction. There's a big difference between a schoolyard bully and the person who protects you from the schoolyard bully. It's quite natural to feel an attachment towards the thing that protects you. And what I'm saying is it would be really strange and perhaps inauthentic if the schoolyard bully was holding your arm behind your back and saying, "Tell me that you love me." Because the minute you get free from the bully, you would say, "No, I don't love that person."
but it gets to the heart of why I wanted to do this conversation. Aren't there just a whole subsets of people, or maybe even whole nation states, though, that love their dictator because they're on the dictator's team? That they don't have their arm behind their back. They just know that they can go to work and they can love who they wish, and they feel safe and secure in their home or workplace or on the way to, and they can have some sense of life. Therefore, they love that system.
I'll never forget my freshman year in college. I dated this refugee from Bosnia, Croatia, Herzegovina. It was in the breakup of Yugoslavia. And I'll never forget my conversations with her where I said, "Yeah, but you weren't living in a free country." And she said, "Of course we were free. We could go to discos." And her parents were physicians, and they were Communist Party members. And I said, "But what would happen if you criticized Tito?" And he said, "Nobody would ever criticize Tito. Tito was a great man. He was a great ruler, and life was so wonderful under Tito." And I said, "Well, but what would happen if you did?" He said, and she said, "Nobody would ever do that. He was a wonderful man." I said, "But what would happen if you did?" And she said, "Well, you would disappear and never be heard from again." And I said, "Well, then you weren't free." But yes, I understand that if you were a Communist Party member and your parents were both high-ranking physicians, and who would ever criticize the great leader, right?
Isn't that so? What's the human condition? What are we designed for? Whether it's God made or evolution, or science. What is the human condition? Are we designed to be free, or are we designed? Is this an exception to the rule?
Well,
where are we in America?
Well, according to the founders, the human condition is not one thing. We are born seeking security. We don't have to be taught that, but we are capable of self-government, but you have to be taught that. So part of the American mission is that you don't have to teach people to seek out security. They're going to do that on their own, but you do have to teach people the benefits of ordered liberty.
Okay. Lots of room to talk about in that. But let's go back to the ancients, though, for a minute before we jump back to the world. There were some societies that did deep thinking on this, right? The Greeks,
Sure.
Romans, maybe not so much.
Yeah, no, I mean, of course. I mean, there are every civilized, once any civilized society had enough food to get through a few winters and a written language, there were people who contemplated these issues.
Okay, so it doesn't matter the culture, Aztecs, Mayans, around the world, ancient Chinese, around the world, people have reflected on this topic.
Yeah, it reflected on the nature of the human condition and how to best organize society.
And so therefore, since we've had millennia of practice, most societies go to that ordered liberty concept more than just safety and security. It's the dominant structure today, right? Because we've all thought about this for a long time, and we've all decided to have freedom and the ability to live our lives the way we want to without threat of force. That's that's how we've all gone to, right?
No, well, it was certainly not the most predominant form, historically speaking, but it is the most dynamic. So the amount of wealth and prosperity produced by the countries who embraced it was so profound that that in terms of wealth and influence and growth, I mean, another thing it does tend to do is it also tends to attract people to it. So when you have a society that is based on freedom and rule of law, people will flee from wherever they are and go to the place where you can be successful. So the places that tend to have freedom also become a magnet for people who want to live that way around the world. So it's the most dynamic, certainly, and the most successful, but it's not the not the predominant form, and certainly not the form that most of the world organize themselves around historically.
Well, historically, it's definitely not. But even currently, how are we? I know we can take the however many billion Chinese there are, and how many 90 million Russians there are, and some other petty dictators around the world that have millions of people in their country. But where are we as far as the freedom or love index? And by the way, is that an appropriate synonym, love and freedom?
I mean, they mean different things, but but it's hard to imagine one without the other. I mean, there are things that can't. As I said earlier, love sort of depends on the absence of violence in order to function. It's a necessary but not sufficient condition. It's necessary. It's a necessary precondition for love. The absence of violence is a precondition for love, I would say. Where are we in the United States? Oh, we're sort of middle of the pack in the mostly free countries. I haven't looked lately, but usually we rank. I'm sure if Jake's on the call, he can look this up. The index of economic freedom by the is a pretty good index because they haven't changed it over the years. So it's been a pretty good way of measuring relative, that they would say economic freedom, but that tends to be, but the things that they actually measure are, the things that make it possible to live in a free society, kind of ordered liberty, rule of law, regulatory efficiency, that kind of stuff. And the United States is, middle of the pack with a red arrow going down. So it's not a good trend, but according to Jake, who just fact checked me, America is 25. So we are the 25th freest country
out of 190-ish.
And actually, he just said right below the United Kingdom. So we are now less free than the place we rebelled against.
Yeah. Again, bouncing. How many countries? I think it's probably only a dozen, is my guess, how many you've been to. How many countries have you been to?
That's a good question. Canada, Mexico, England, Ireland. I don't know if Scotland and Wales count as countries. Russia. I think that's it. How many?
Less than I thought.
Yeah.
No Caribbean countries, no Central or South American countries.
No, not. I mean, I don't count airports and stuff like that.
Right,
so
right, right. But we got to get you on
I would say you
sabbatical.
have to have spent the night there, right?
We got to get you on sabbatical a little bit more, Professor. To need to travel some a little bit more. The countries that you mentioned, is it conceivable you could fall in love with them?
I loved Scotland. I absolutely loved Scotland.
I mean, could you renounce your citizenship and be a Scottish citizen?
I don't know about that.
Could you love them equally, though? Could you live there? Could you be an expat and feel deeply affectionate towards the country and its people?
I don't. I would hate to say no, but I am so thoroughly American. I can't. It's kind of like, and it's funny because we felt this towards the Republican Party. Like, even though in many ways the Republican Party has rejected me, I haven't really changed my political ideology. And if I were to move to Scotland and grow to love its people and its, traditions and laws, I don't know that I would ever reject the wisdom of the founders. And because America is an ideological nation state, and I still hold on to that ideology, I would never cease to be a patriotic American.
Okay. Now I was going to go down a different line of questioning, but we've kind of gotten to the crux of why I wanted to have this conversation.
Okay.
Out of the 190 countries, however many there are now, of the world, how many are ideological nation states? And I'm not looking for an exact answer. I would have told you the question in advance so you could research if I really wanted. But in general, is this still unique, or are there a lot of folks that just are willing to change their system of government because the current premier or prime minister or president says no, we're changing it, and they kind of go along with it for one reason or another, good or bad? And all of a sudden, it's not an ideological nation state. It's the history of organization. What's your guess?
I just don't know. I mean, I'd really have to. I'm gonna punt. I don't know the answer. I don't.
Fair enough.
I would have to really think about that question and then apply some sort of standard.
But is it a majority though? Are most people have an ideal? Do they know why they're a Belizean or an Argentinian or a Slovenian or a Indian? I mean, do they know what they believe in and what they're willing to die for? Are they so vested in love of what their country stands for that they are willing to die for it?
Well, I think it's important to remember when we use the term nation state that each one of these terms, ideological, nation, and state, all have a different meaning. And so we really are saying something pretty unique when we say we are an ideological nation state. So, for instance, the nation is the people, how the people and the culture self-identify as a group of human beings. And then the state is the government. So right off the bat, when you say that something is a nation state, you are saying that these people who identify are actually the same as the government. And so if you are somebody who, let's say I did move to Scotland, right? Let's pretend that I haven't done my DNA, so I know I do happen to know how Scottish I am.
Sure.
But let's just pretend and I am sort of a good old-fashioned American mutt. But I could live there my whole life and never really be Scottish. Which means that I would be excluded from the nation part of the nation state. Because to be Scottish is something different than simply self-identification with a belief system. The same would go for France. and other countries, or being Polish, they tend to have some kind of an ethnic or an ethno-linguistic reason why they exist.
But even stronger in China and Japan and Indonesia and
yeah,
all over the world.
right. You could move to China, live there your whole life, and never be Chinese.
Uh-huh.
Right.
So back to my question, you're kind of narrowing it down some. How many ideological nation states are there?
Well, I think there are probably more than I would suspect.
Fair enough.
Because I think that places like Canada are probably almost there. I think in many ways Mexico is interestingly kind of getting there. A lot of Latin and Central and South American countries are kind of, have this advantage in that many of them are multi-ethnic, multicultural to begin with, nation states. And so it's a little easier. It's a little harder the closer that a country is to being a monoculture. It's harder to imagine that ever being the case, right? So Japan, right? You can't imagine that it might happen someday, but it's hard to imagine Japan ever being an ideological nation state. So, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a system of laws that that aren't pretty darn close to what we would call ordered liberty. It's just resists what we would call this permanent binding as part of your national identity, that in fact you are nothing else except for an ideological nation state. Because in America, I mean, we're maybe the purest and oldest example of this. There is nothing that holds together the United States except for those ideals. Other countries have other reasons why they exist. We don't have any other reason why we exist.
Which goes back to where we began. And then maybe I'll jump in if there's friends don't have questions. So this love of the monarchy, and I do mean to be respectful towards the Queen. I watched Princess Diana's wedding, or I'm delighted to watch, and I watched a little bit of The Crown. I'm in, but it kind of bores me a little bit. But there's a lot of things that bore me. It's interesting, but it's not the most interesting thing for me. But they do have that common thread of history, of distinction of the family that you so talk about so often, the tribe that is built around a family. And they are one of the world's wealthiest families. I mean, they own property all over the world and make money from that property. It's not just like idle land. It is a very wealthy family. And the citizens love that family. And maybe we have elements of that in the United States. We love the Obamas, or we love the Trumps, or the Bushes, or there's little sub elements of that, but it's not a deep cultural. We're not all Washingtonians. We don't all love the tribe of Washington or Jefferson or Adams or Madison. And so I am trying to pin you down a little bit. There are few true ideological nation states. I mean, there may be a bundle, but they also have some other thread of the clan that binds them together that we don't have, right?
Right. We are in many ways the most dependent upon the ideology, right?
So isn't that just why do we hate each other then? And the opposite, this conversation's on love. Why do we hate each other? And I don't know whether we truly do or not, but it sure seems like we do. Americans, why do we seem to hate the other 40 to 60% of each other? I just don't get it. I am truly confused of where we are in America, and seeing the love of Americans outpouring to the Queen of England, which I think is kind of nice, actually. I have no critique over that. I'm not mad at my mom for loving the Queen and being truly, authentically proud of King Charles, I think it is, the son. He's the new king. And my mom is so thankful that it happened to be Charles and it didn't have, she loves Charles. I have no idea what all that means. I don't know why my mom's into that, but I'm not angry at her for having that loyalty to that clan, which she has no connection to. I don't get it, but I'm not angry about it. But I do, everyone, Professor, I know this is now almost a rant. We pledge allegiance to the flag, the little kids all over America. And I know some conservatives say they don't, but all those schools that I go to, they still say they pledge allegiance to the flag. And then every elected official and every military officer, every government service swears allegiance to the Constitution. And I keep wondering when I see all these rants about how we hate the other team or the other tribe, I kind of say, well, what stars do you want to take off the flag? It's the United States of America. Are you so mad at Mississippi or California or Texas or Maine that you want to take them off the flag and you want them to succeed? Really? Are you that angry, or is it just a show? And I'm trying to figure out if this is just people bored so they say stuff and they don't really mean it, or whether we're truly in trouble. And how do people like you and I help kind of put us back into a historical perspective of what a unique point in time this is, that we should be celebrating our differences in America. We shouldn't be hating on each other. There's been a lot of hate throughout the history of the human race. Why do we hate each other now, currently? I know there's a lot for you to hang on. Why don't you answer that in however you'd like to, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Well, it's easy to fall into easy love and easy hate with abstractions. And it's very difficult to engage in real love and real hate with real people. And so as people have become more cut off from other real human beings, more people become abstractions. And so thus the love and the hatred becomes easier. It's really easy to hate someone who you don't have to live next door to. The person you live next door to, loving them and hating them is harder. It requires more work. And so as more and more people, I'm trying to think of, I've been to most of the United States, but I guess I've never been to, I don't know if I've ever been to Maine, for instance. So I guess, it might be easy for me to have some sort of stereotype of people from Maine. And
yeah, no one hates Maine and Vermont.
I'm just trying to think.
Connecticut, no, none of us hate those three states.
Yeah, but at the same time, I just went to the gym this morning, and one of the guys swimming on one side of me was a rich guy, and the other guy was a kind of working class guy, and we're all just, another guy was another sort of doctor or something, and we're all just kind of hanging out and swimming laps and joking, and everyone's really nice and considerate to one another, and we all hold open the door when somebody's coming, and that's how most people treat one another when in person. But if all I knew about one of these guys was a bumper sticker or a tweet or an angry Facebook post about seeing one of them at their worst or most animated or most angry, I could probably convince myself that that's a bad person, and then confirmation bias kicks in, and then we just start doubling down on it because we want to be right about ourselves. So each of these things it's much easier to spiral into an easy love or an easy hate when other people are abstractions to us.
Yeah, that's lovely. And Jake, if you could help me and Tony at some point pulling out some of those quotes the professor just said, because there's some important messages in there. I guess, as always, I say that was the last question. Well, I'll ask one more. So I've been to 22 countries, I think, is my count. I'd have to look at my passports, but I think it's 22. And almost without exception, I can't imagine being a citizen of China. It was really worth visiting, but I can't imagine that. So maybe one exception. But my parents loved Russia. They did a cruise in Russia and they thought it was wonderful. And my dad's like an anti-communist he's deceased, but was an anti-communist American extraordinaire, but he loved Russia. So I don't know. I probably feel the same way about Russia. But every place I go to, I really like the people. I like the places. I like the food. I like their freedom, their thought. I mean, I've had conversations. It's just really a wonderful world.
Yeah, and I would say, the way I traveled, I was poor, so I was staying in hostels and stuff, and it ends up being a multinational experience because I had the same experience. If anything, you think, well, I've always heard that French people are, snobby or rude or something, until you meet some actual French people. And I came away thinking, gosh, I've really liked every single French person I've ever encountered. How could I have some sort of stereotype about French people as being anything other than wonderful? And the same was true of Germans and Russia. Going to Russia is one of the places I have been, and I found the Russian people to be pretty nice. Most people are pretty nice. It's very natural. It's easy to hate in the abstract. It's much harder to do it when you're face to face.
All right, we'll leave it at there for now, and we'll see if Jake or Tony or Ben have any questions for you. Otherwise, I'll ask some follow-up.
Well, I have a question because Jake posted something about Peter Schramm and Gordon Lloyd, and I was wondering what that was referring to. What did Peter Schramm and Gordon Lloyd do?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I've been having some computer issues. No, so it was back when, Tootle, when you were talking about renouncing your country and, embracing Scotland.
Oh.
I mean, Schramm is from Hungary and Gordon Lloyd is from England, and they both, well, Schramm had to do it because of, communists and war. So he came to the US as a refugee, but then Gordon Lloyd chose to come to the United States, and they both renounced their former citizenship. And I mean, I never got to meet Schramm because he passed away before I started the MAG program, but I have met Gordon Lloyd, and he is one of the most patriotic people in the American sense that I've ever met, and he wasn't born an American.
Yeah, and the Peter Schramm essay that we've mentioned many times before, "Born American but in the Wrong Place," is really a powerful example of what we mean when we say that we're an ideological nation state. I mean, quite literally being told by your father that even though you have never set foot in the United States before, that your family is actually American. You just happen to have been born in the wrong place. So now we have to move to that country because we are actually Americans, even though we don't speak English and we don't, and we are Hungarians. We're Americans. We were just born in the wrong place.
Nice. I don't think I could ever renounce my citizenship. I don't know if it's conceivable. I don't care who's president. And I don't care how much I hate whoever is president in the future. It's an idea that we get to fight for what we believe in. I guess maybe if we become a dictatorship, then maybe. Well,
I mean, I think the standard should be for both of us, or I'm not going to tell you how to live your life, but if the United States of America ceased to be a country that was that ceased to be America, then it would be then the more patriotic thing would be to to still adhere to the ideals of America and
wherever you may be.
Yeah, but as long as the United States government is still the United States government and the Constitution is still enforced, I could never see it for myself either.
Okay. But that doesn't mean that these other people around the world aren't really decent, nice people in really fun, interesting countries, right?
Of course. Yeah. Well, yeah.
And we should be helping those other 150 countries become more free, and I guess looking to those other 24 countries to try to figure out how we should become more free. Right?
Well, again, I just think that beyond wishing them well, I think I don't know how. I think I tend to go back to the classic definition of American exceptionalism, which is that the primary way that we help other countries is to continue to be an example that human beings can govern themselves. And that is more important than any help that we might want to give them. So yeah, it's a difficult. It's difficult because the United States is a big and powerful country, and the smallest gesture on the part of the United States can often have, powerful effects in a smaller country. So I feel like we have to be a little bit aware of how much bigger and more powerful we are than other countries when we're trying to help.
So let me and let Ben or Tony, if you have a quick question, jump in, or otherwise I'm going to ask another contemporary issue. All right, you'll get a chance here in a second. So this is existential. I don't even know that word. It seems like a political science degree and a lawyer kind of guy would know that word, but I don't. This real world Ukraine issue between a former powerhouse, but now Russia, and America / European Union. And I know we're spending billions more sending, weapons that kill people to Ukraine. But is that what we're really exporting? Or is there something else that this fight is over, Professor, in Ukraine? Russia versus America. And I know it's not Russia versus America. It's EU / America with a lot of money from America. I don't think it's a proxy war, actually. That's the reason I'm trying to be clear. What is it really about? Is it oil? Is it security? Is it love? I mean, what are we really fighting over?
Are you asking why is the United States supporting Ukraine?
Yeah. I mean, is it power and money? Are we protecting a clan? Or is it an idea that we're protecting? I mean, what are the stakes in this battle? And similarly, what is Russia there? I mean, are they thinking that they need to provide security to their citizens and therefore the West is a threat to them? And what is this about?
No. Russia under Vladimir Putin is an illegitimate gangster state. It is a kleptocracy ruled by gangsters. Therefore, it has no. That regime has no legitimate interests. It is an illegitimate government.
But is that why the Eastern European countries are reacting so vigorously to this?
Well, I think the reason Eastern European countries are reacting so vigorously is because they understand that they could be next. In other words, if Russia gets away with what they are attempting to do in Ukraine, they know that Putin has designs on Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland. He is aggrieved. He has a perceived grievance against all of those countries that he would. I don't know if he really believes this, but that have slighted Russia. I think the other thing that's interesting, Jake, look on that list again, if you will. Find where Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Poland are on that list of free countries, and I think you'll see why Russia considers those countries to be such a threat right on their border. Do you have it? What do you know where they rank, Jake?
Sorry, still loading.
Oh, sorry. But yeah, the existence of those countries represents a threat to Russia. Still loading. Maybe I need to. I might be able to find it faster.
No, sorry.
Yeah.
Lithuania and Latvia are actually ahead of the U.S.
Okay.
Lithuania is 17 and Latvia is 18. And then Georgia is right below the United States. They're 26.
What
So
about
yeah.
Estonia and Poland?
Poland is 39.
Okay.
Estonia is number 7.
Yeah. So these are free countries, right
And
on Russia's border.
Russia is 113.
Yeah.
Well, Professor, I lost you for a second, but so I hope this isn't out of turn. I'm still trying to get at the heart of the matter, though. I was hoping you were going to answer that Estonia and Latvia and Romania and Bulgaria and Poland wanted to be free. They wanted to live their lives free, and maybe the point is they actually are.
They are, right. They are in many ways freer than the United States is.
Yeah,
right?
which is, I've got to do a lot of reflecting on that. But your answer, though, was that where they were next, that they could lose their freedom because the Soviet Empire could come back. So is it love or is it fear that guides people into their nation state? I mean, are they going to just do what they're going to do to survive, or no, love's more important and they're going to go fight and die for their country out of patriotism, love?
The answer is yes.
Well, that doesn't help. You're the professor here guiding us how to interact in American society.
No, but human beings are not unicausal in their actions. We have multiple reasons why we do everything, and so especially when you are motivated by love, hate, and fear, and they're all pointing in the same direction, that is a powerful motivating factor. Jake, I think, has a question. Or
yeah, jump in, Jake.
Well, yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, all of those former Soviet republics like Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, they have ethnic populations that have lived in those countries for centuries, maybe even like a millennia, if you go back to Ukraine, and they were dominated by the Russians for hundreds of years. And so for hundreds of years, they knew that they were once a free country, but against their will, they were subjugated by the Russians. And then, you know, thanks to the efforts of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and the other Cold War leaders, the Soviet Union collapsed. They were granted freedom for about 20 years, but then immediately, pretty much after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation got taken over by Vladimir Putin, who essentially said that the saddest moment in the history of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union, and he wanted to reverse that. And then he went to a conference in Munich back in 2007, where he flat out said that a goal of the Russian Federation is to reestablish the former borders of the Soviet Union. And then, you know, he goes and invades Georgia in like 2008. You have the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. And now you have the full-on war that's taking place in Ukraine right now. And Putin has, I mean, some documents have leaked from Russia saying that after Ukraine, you know, we're going to go into Kazakhstan and we're going to go into other countries. And so these countries know if Ukraine falls, we're next.
Wow. What are you, a professor? Are you a history guy, Jake? That was nice. So Professor Tootle, do you agree with Jake Peterson? Are you a professor, Jake? You're a teacher though? Yeah. Professor, do you agree with the teacher?
yeah.
So when we are trying to figure out our lot in life, I know we want to pay the mortgage. We want to go on a vacation. At some point, you and I want a nicer t-shirt than the t-shirts we're wearing. So I know there's clothes, there's cars, there's houses, there's travel. There's all sorts of interesting things to buy in the world. But there's also something is this wrong? I think that there's a lot of young people, and I don't blame them, by the way, I'm just curious about it, that don't seem to think it's important to be an American, or its patriotism is actually maybe bad. That there's nothing we should be proud about in America. We have a long soiled history, and other countries have just as much right to be more proud of their country than America has. And I really am not trying to make a generational battle, but I do think there's a difference going on that people don't understand America and where we want to be. And I get all the daily and weekly and monthly stuff, having a spouse or children, or I get all that. But isn't there something, and I'm not talking spiritually either, an afterlife, or even being a good human. Is there something though that a country should be? Shouldn't a country be good? Or shouldn't we want to have that sense of loyalty to our place? And God bless those other countries. I want them to have that loyalty to their place too. But am I wrong? Or do you have this sense of angst or concern, at least, that we seem to be missing we're missing the point about what it means to be an American?
Yes. I think that you should love America because American ideals are true. And if you have, and that you're, I don't have any problem saying that I believe in my own values, because if I thought other values were better, I would have them. So of course, I think that my values are the best values to have. But I think that one of the things that happens out of ignorance is people both love and hate America for all the wrong reasons. When I remember thinking back to when Colin Kaepernick was protesting the American flag, and I remember thinking to myself, the wrong people are celebrating the flag and the wrong people are protesting the flag. And that this is something that really indicates our national ignorance. When I see a big truck that flies both the Confederate flag, what's known as the Confederate flag, and the American flag simultaneously, that should never happen. Right? Those two flags are mutually exclusive. And if you're somebody who believes in human equality, you should not be the one protesting the flag. You should be the one waving the flag. And this is all the result of a kind of national ignorance about what the United States is. And when we say we're an ideological nation state, understanding exactly what that ideology is, what are you committed to? And I'll plug the Bill of Rights Institute. They have a great website. If you don't know what you're supposed to stand for, go do a little Google search for the Bill of Rights Institute. Cruise around their website for what it means to follow, to understand ordered liberty, and it's all there. It's all stuff that's not that hard to discern. And one of the things that's funny is I was listening to a podcast on an unrelated subject, but people were talking about their citizenship tests. And I don't know if you've looked at it, the citizenship test lately, but it's actually pretty good. And one of the things that we act like, oh, it's so controversial and so hard, and there would be so many controversies. And actually, we make people do this when they come here.
Right.
And the test that we have come up with and the little booklet that they give immigrants is fine. It's good. I would say if you understand what immigrants are forced to understand in order to come here, you would have a pretty basic understanding of what it means to be an American, and the ideology that is at the core of the ideological nation state that we belong to.
Lovely. Ben, do you have any questions today? We're almost out of time, but we do have 5 or 10 minutes if necessary. Ben, any questions or thoughts or comments?
Well, the only thought I had was thinking back to probably the beginning of the conversation when we're talking about the Queen, and thinking about my own grandmother, who absolutely loved the people of Britain. If she could, she would live in London full time, but there were 2 problems. Number 1, she didn't speak with a British accent. Number 2, she had good teeth. But,
Ben, I moved to strike that inappropriate joke.
But be that as it may, she visited London, England, as much as she could. She actually was a house mother at the 80 Pi House at the University of Cincinnati for many, many years. And because she was with the University of Cincinnati, she got to go on all these great junkets to England. When she would touch down, the person leading the tour would say, "Now come with me," and she'd say goodbye. And she would catch up with them at the end of the tour. She'd go on her own tour. And it was just fascinating to listen to her talk about the history, the people, and that type of thing about England. So when I think of England, I kind of think of my own grandmother. Plus, I do have friends over in England, and I'd love to go visit them myself because I think it's a great country in itself. Is it America? Absolutely not. I am surprised Jake found out we were below England in the livability index, I think it was, but still, this is still a great place to live.
Yeah, nice comments. I've been to England. My parents spent 6 months in England. I like England. I'm still confused by the loyalty to the clan, but that's not my deal. A professor's already explained that, I think. Other questions or comments, Ben, or is that good?
No, that's really the only comment I had this morning, other than, as usual, I enjoyed the conversation.
Sure, appreciate you. Tony, I always try to stereotype you as a liberal, and every time you surprise me, because I don't know what you are actually. So questions, comments, did any of this conversation offend you? Do you think we missed a major point on love or hatred?
No, I don't think you did. I think that the professor got at it when, it's really difficult for us to create the other when we get to know someone, right? When we cultivate compassion or empathy or just, simple conversation. And that's what this has taught me. Plus, outside of this, what I've been doing more and more, it's just listening, more and hearing empathically what people are saying, and having a conversation changes the way that I think about, I don't know, that guy that maybe has the flags in the back of the truck.
Both flags on the back of the truck.
Yeah, so it's good. I love the conversation, and I love the daring to use the word love as it relates to politics is interesting. So.
Oh yeah, that's actually probably more controversial than we know.
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah.
Reaction to that, Professor?
Yeah, I was thinking two things. First, I want to think more about like what it, why it would be controversial to think about love. And one of my old professors wrote this book that really influenced me. It was called The Degradation of American History, and one of the chapters, it was actually entitled Love and Obligation. So I've been sort of immersed in a world where we would use the word love in describing our obligations to truth and describing the past. And I got steeped in that pretty early in my academic career. And so I wonder if I'm a little bit different just because of this. I was lucky enough to know this guy, and I was his student when he was working on that book. So it really influenced me early on. And then I had this other example of something that's going on right now, which is my classes are going really well, and I'm rediscovering my love of teaching. And during the pandemic, when my students were all online, my students became abstractions to me. They became problems. They only presented themselves to me as people with problems, and my only role to them was someone who creates problems and solves problems, but we weren't really having any real interactions of the kind that really matter in terms of forming relationships and communicating with one another. And being back in the classroom full time with regular students, it sort of hits. What we've been talking about just really hits you, like, oh, this is what I like doing. I like these real human beings who are quirky and weird and have these insane issues, and every year are a little bit different, and it goes from being something that is depressing to something that is enriching. So I've been rediscovering the value of human contact in my own classes. It's been great this semester to have everybody back, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Love that. Well, sorry you have to take time out of your lives for some adult learners here.
But you'll
Jake,
notice that even in our relationship, I thought it was important for me to go to Colorado. I thought it was really important to actually meet some of these people in person, and
Agreed.
we did have conversations over some beers and long hours of drinks and stuff that we would have never had in a purely virtual environment.
That's completely true, is it not? Tony, agreed. So Jake, I know this is, maybe someday somebody's going to find this on the interweb and talk about it. So I don't want you to do too much personal stuff. But speaking of love, you've got a major event coming up. Don't give any details or anything. This is your private life, so please just hide as much as you wish. But do you have any reflections on love of people, love of society, love of culture, love of history, love of this is kind of a break for you. This is a demarcation for you in your personal life. Any reflections on today, on what we should all be thinking about to be good citizens, good humans?
So in my situation, in my profession as a high school social studies teacher, I teach at a unique school, and I have students from literally all over the country: California, Florida, Maine, New Jersey, New York, etc., Washington, everywhere. And something that I've noticed with my students is they can make friends with people from all over the country. Like, it isn't, oh, the West Coast kids hang out together and then the East Coast kids hang out together. No, all of my students, they find common interests with one another, and they can all coalesce around that one thing. And a lot of like the prejudices that they have are just kind of human ones. And it's not so much, oh, I hate him because he's from the East Coast, or vice versa. It's just kind of, oh, he's really annoying when we eat food or whatever. And so what I've found by teaching my students is that people from all around this country can get together, whether you come from a red state or a blue state, that doesn't matter. What matters is focus on the things that you have in common and try to work to accomplish those. And then the differences that you have, you can sort those out later. But my students are really good about just finding, making friends with each other and finding something that they all have in common. And that's how they're all able to unite. It kind of goes back to, the Schramm essay, like born American, but in the wrong place. Everyone in this country, we're all born Americans in America for the most part. And I think based off of the mainstream media and what, gets clickbait on the internet, we focus too much on the hypertension, the differences. But I've spent a lot of time this past year going to Colorado. It's been great. Colorado is a much different state than Utah. It looks similar, but the people, Utah is a very red state, and then Colorado's got a lot of blue influence, but I've met really nice people in Colorado. And as long as you just focus on trying to not be a jerk to people, like just give them common, decent human courtesy, you can get along. And then the whole differences politically, religiously, ethnically, that comes later. But I try not to focus on that. I just want to treat people how I want to be treated. And I've gone along great. My students, that's what they do, and it works out really well for them.
Well,
I've always found that one of the keys is to not be around noise or crowds. When you're trying to have a real interaction with somebody, nobody's at their best when it's noisy and when it's crowded. So one of the things I really like about traveling on my motorcycle is I love being in diners, because and sitting at the counter by yourself, you can talk, you can not talk, but it's not crowded. in a small town when you're at a diner and it's not noisy, and you realize like, oh, everybody's pretty nice, you know. Now when you get to a big city and everybody's in a hurry and honking, and you know, that's not the time to make friends.
So Jake, you left it big picture, which I'm gonna leave. I'm not gonna reveal it, but you're in a good time in your life, and we are both happy and appreciative and just celebrating with you. So bravo, Jake. Thank you for what you're doing for this team. And oh my gosh, what a great page you're turning to the next chapter. So I'll leave it at that, which is aloof enough. So Professor, I've always been pretty good at micro in what you've been talking about, the diner. I love people, no matter what they are. They can be old or gay or black or white, everything. People are weird and eccentric and interesting and fun. I've been pretty good at micro in my life. Somehow, I'm going to have you end with this. Somehow we lose it between micro and macro. All of a sudden we become, instead of the small family or tribe or county, city, and all of a sudden we get into international relations, and society does weird stuff. It seems to me, it doesn't make any sense to me why we fight some wars or hate other groups of people. Can you leave us with some thought on love? It's easy to, I mean, you've talked about this several times today. It's easy to love somebody you're with. They're beautiful. They're interesting. They're fun. They care about you. They hold the door. They ask questions. That's easy. But all of a sudden we go a degree or two of separation, and all of a sudden we revert back to the flags and we hate the person that we just loved. What's going on with that? How does a history professor help us through this?
Well, I'll quote one of my favorite history professors. There's a history professor, mostly known for his books about baseball. His name's Charles C. Alexander. He wrote a book called Our Game, and nice book on, actually really interesting, called Breaking the Slump, which was a history of baseball during the Depression. And ends up being a really interesting way to look at the Depression in the United States through baseball. But one of the things that he would say, when we were studying populism and progressivism, but in particular during his lessons on populism, he's from East Texas, and he had this great accent. It's one of the best Texas accents because it's got a little bit of Foghorn Leghorn, Louisiana, you know. But he would say, I have met many people, but I have never met the people. And then we were expected to figure out what he meant by that. But what he meant by that statement is that there's no such thing as the macro. The reason you struggle with the macro is that you cease to deal with human beings, and you're just dealing with character traits. And once you begin coming up with metrics to describe human beings, they are now abstractions. And it's one of the scariest things that we have to grapple with is this eternal debate over whether history should be a social science or in the humanities. And my friends who are good social scientists, I would say, a good social scientist would just have a more nuanced understanding of what science is, which is we're here to commit ourselves to some kind of system of truth and measure it. But most people view social science as being prescriptive. We're doing this so that we can tell you what to do. And because of that, I've always leaned towards the humanities side of the debate, and said and repeated this quote of Kant, where he says, out of the crooked timber of humanity, nothing straight has ever been wrought. And when the minute you start trying to quantify what people believe, you can't help but create false systems of measurement and then begin measuring them. You know, as I sometimes say to my students, how much do you love your mother? Is that 9 or is it 47? You know, like what, there is no love meter for how much you love your mom, right? How much do you love your kids, right? Is that 13? Is it 28? What's the scale? You know, and then so many of these questions where we pretend like people are automatons that are. Now, I'll say the scary thing about human beings is how easy it is to manipulate their behavior using social science. That's scary. But if well, I'll tell you another story about another historian by name. I don't even know if this one's true. This is one of those legends. I don't know if it's true. I'm repeating a legend. But John Gaddis, who was a famous Cold War historian, and there's a story that he would go to the American Political Science Association and just go to meetings and raise his hand and say, where is the independent variable? And do this in order to indicate that this isn't science, right? There's no independent variable when you're talking about human beings. And so everybody should have a little more humility in making these pronouncements about human behavior. And the old joke about the historian says to the political scientist says to the historian, well, I know it happened, but does it work in theory? You can't do this with human beings. And so the reason we struggle with what you call the micro and the macro is because there are things about individual human traits that can be isolated and manipulated. If that wasn't true, then, oh, is it really, is that story about Gaddis true? Wow. Yeah, I'd always heard that it was true, but I never, I repeated it, not knowing if I was saying something that was true. The reason we struggle with this micro versus macro is precisely because if there weren't things about us that couldn't be isolated and described and manipulated, then advertising wouldn't work. You know, then algorithms for Facebook and TikTok and Instagram, they wouldn't work, but they do work. But what they really are good at is reinforcing existing behavior. But that in no way or shouldn't describe the human experience, because I was talking to one of my students about this actually, and one of my students brought this up in class on Wednesday. So another reason why it's so good to have in-person classes, because this is exactly the kind of discussion we would never have if we were, via Zoom and we log in and log out, right? Is she went to the bookstore with her boyfriend, and she said the great thing about bookstores is I end up buying a bunch of books on things that I didn't know I was interested in.
Yeah.
Because in a virtual environment, all you get is more of what they think you're interested in. But when you go into a place that is curated by another human being, it contains all the wackiness and weirdness of that other human being. That's why, for Anthony and I, music recommendations. Yeah, it's interesting how often Spotify or what's the I don't know, the other music services, how often, what is it?
Bandcamp is one.
Yeah, right. How good they are at sometimes predicting what I would be interested in. But I still have to rely on my friends who are human beings, because there's a jazz guitarist coming to town and I needed to know that. And the algorithm says I shouldn't want to see him, but I do, right? Wynton Marsalis is also going to be here. Like, I want to see that show, but the computer would never put that in front of me. I still have to have human beings who aren't just trying to reinforce my own prejudices presenting this material in front of me.
All right, Professor, I love your long answer to my simple question, micro and macro. But I especially love that I think this is our longest show so far, our longest conversation, and it was about love. And that probably means something. And so I'm going to reflect on that today. and really appreciate your conversation. Last call, Ben, Anthony, Jake, Professor. Otherwise, we're going to end with that long answer on understanding the complexities and nuances and variety and the love of each other as fellow humans. I love that answer. All right, good. All right, Professor, thank you. Let's